Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Bruno Nachtergaele, Chair of the Senate, and I'm very glad to see that you all came here to hear about the proposal that we have to streamline the merit and promotion system, and it's called the STEP Plus proposal. And so we will first have a presentation that explains what it is, and then we will have plenty of time for questions, and hopefully we can answer all your questions. But the questions that we can answer, we will take along, we will take home, and we will work them out. So to explain what the STEP Plus system is all about, we have Robert Veenstra from the Department of Economics, and we couldn't have a better person to give this presentation. He was a member of the Special Committee of the Representative Assembly on simplifying the personnel process, where it all started. That committee had a proposal, essentially, to change the way we do accelerations and a number of other things. This was very favorably reviewed by the Senate committees, and so we then asked the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs to look into implementing something like that. And then Robert co-chaired an implementation committee that the Vice Provost put together. I don't remember the exact name. It's something like the Implementation Committee Work Group on the streamlining the academic personnel process. And they came up with what he will explain in a minute. So there is also further details to be worked out. There's another joint work group by the Senate and the Vice Provost looking at the details so that this can be implemented if this proposal finds approval by the Academic Senate. In particular, there will be a vote in the Representative Assembly meeting this June. But we would like all your departmental representatives to be informed about what the proposal exactly is, and that's why we start with a presentation by Robert Veenstra. Robert?
Thank you, Bruno. So there are two personnel systems used at the University of California. And one are the accelerations in time that we're very used to on this campus, but that's not the only system. Berkeley uses a half-step system whereby merit actions are reviewed on a fixed schedule every 2 years for assistant and associate, every 3 years after that. But every time a merit action is reviewed, or a promotion action, the individual can get more than one merit step. So that's called the half-step system. A kind of a partial half-step system is also used at Santa Cruz. And there, the extra half steps that you can get are actually half steps of off-scale salary. They're not formal half steps in our ladder system. So the STEP Plus plan would be or proposal would be a proposal to switch the way we do things at Davis to pretty much what it's done like at Berkeley. Two crucial steps, two crucial points right off the bat. Accelerations would still occur under the STEP Plus systems, but they would not be accelerations in time, like we're used to thinking about them. So merit cases would be reviewed on a fixed schedule, but every time a case is reviewed, every person would in principle be eligible for more than one merit step if they met the criterion for that. So you could still call, if they got more than one, you could still call that an acceleration, maybe call it an acceleration in progress if you like. It's just not an acceleration in time. So we are used to using the word acceleration for accelerations in time. So just to avoid that confusion, I'll sort of try to avoid the word acceleration altogether in this talk, and I'll just talk about merit actions of more than one step. Secondly, as Bruno mentioned, this is just a proposal. I'll be talking about the history today, but ultimately whether or not this is implemented will depend on a vote in the Representative Assembly at its June meeting, June 3rd, I believe. So that's what we're leading up to here. So for today, let me explain in more detail the background, where this came from, some of the committees that Bruno already referred to briefly. I want to answer any questions that you have, and feel free to interrupt me during the presentation of the questions, that's fine. And then we'll definitely write down your suggestions, and as Bruno said, respond to them here, and the ones we can't respond to here, we'll try to figure out and get you an answer. Okay, so where did this came from? So it dates back at least to 2011 when the Representative Assembly passed the resolution that I show here, saying it wanted to form a task force to determine the feasibility of potential simplifications to the academic personnel process. So that led to a committee chaired by Jeannie Darby, this academic task force on simplifying the academic personnel process. And that report came up with two main proposals. Oh, here's the committee members of that. I won't read them, but you might spot some people here and I'd encourage you to chat with them if you have more questions that aren't answered here. So there were two major recommendations from that report. The first is this STEP Plus plan. Okay, it supported the STEP Plus plan, which I've already described in rough detail. I'll be filling in some more details later. And why did this committee support it? Well, first, they thought it would result in a significant drop in the number of actions reviewed each year, because actions are only reviewed on a fixed schedule. So there is a saving in staff and faculty and administrative time, right? If there wasn't that right in the beginning, we wouldn't really be talking about it. But this committee liked STEP Plus for a couple of other reasons too. Second, it thought that a STEP Plus, because everybody is eligible, would allow people to come up for more than a merit action, even if they're not the kind of person who would bring up their action early, right? You don't have to make the conscious decision to bring it up early. You just file your merit actions on this fixed schedule. And then when the department sees it, anybody can suggest it's worth more than one merit step, right? You could suggest it, chair could suggest it, faculty suggest it, it'll get voted on, and then it'll go up from there. We can talk about voting procedures a little later if you're interested in that. So there's sort of lots of flexibility that way. Thirdly, this committee liked it because it thought you don't have any more of these one-year review periods, which can be kind of short and hard to assess. Right, in my own department, we've sometimes had to look at cases with one-year review periods and no teaching because the person was on leave, right? That's a hard case to assess, right? You're not going to have those kind of very short cases. And finally, for all these reasons, this committee thought that actually the system was more equitable, right? More people would be considered than under the current system. You're looking at full review periods, and it liked that whole idea. There was a second recommendation from this committee, and this is where this word streamlining that we hear came from. And this basically said that for normal actions, do we have to have as much paperwork as we have now and all these levels of review? Can't we sort of streamline this? Do they have to, for example, go to faculty personnel committees, which we at Davis make use of much more than any other campus, right? Couldn't the dean's office just look at those? Barbara. Yes, the budget committee looks at them all of them.
So the FPCs that we have really save CAP a lot of work.
They do.
But they're still being reviewed by faculty.
They do. They save CAP a lot of work, but they're still being reviewed by faculty. So I'm not saying they shouldn't be there or anything like that.
I guess the only point I was making is when you say we're the only campus that uses the FPC, it's important to note that all actions are reviewed by a Senate committee at Berkeley.
Quite right.
I think that's probably true with some of the other institutions.
Quite right.
As well.
Thank you. Yeah. This second proposal, we'll call this streamlining or streamlining the FPCs, if you like, is not really what I'm talking about today. This is going to be sort of it's going to have a separate timeline. So what I want to focus on today is just the STEP Plus proposal. Oops. So this first report from the committee that Jeannie Darby chaired went back to the Senate Representative Assembly, looked at it, pretty much liked the STEP Plus part of it, had a more mixed opinion on the issue of what to do with the FPCs. Based on that, a second committee was formed. This was a committee I co-chaired with Bruce Winterhalter, Academic Personnel Streamlining Implementation Work Group. And here's the members of that committee. We had both some faculty and some staff on this, right? We wanted to kind of work out the nuts and bolts. How would this actually work in practice? Here's sort of some major topics that we covered. We sort of took these two proposals from the first committee, the STEP Plus and streamlining the FPCs. We talked about them separately. We ultimately decided we like STEP Plus and we think STEP Plus could be done right away, next academic year. Okay, and that's the proposal here, implemented for 2014-2015. Whereas any streamlining of the FPCs would definitely take more time. You've got to have much more discussion in the colleges, and different colleges really had quite different opinions on how well their FPCs were or were not working. So it's just on a separate timetable, and as I said, it's not really my focus today. Okay, so just to make it clear that this STEP Plus proposal really does have half steps, here's a sample faculty scale. This is for academic year faculty, ladder rank. And you see all the red, we're filling in the half steps. So we throw out the Roman numerals of the step system. Let's just use Arabic. We got 1.5, 2.5, all the way. Those salaries are halfway in between the salaries in black, all the way up to professor step 9, 9.5. What about above scale? Well, our committee ran out of time. So we didn't really, we just punted on above scale. We didn't make a recommendation. Fine with me to have above scale included and have half steps at above scale. It's not, at above scale, it's not really a workload issue. Remember, that was the goal of us, is to decrease the number of personnel actions we're looking at, right, by putting them on this fixed schedule. At above scale, it's not a workload issue. No accelerations, virtually none, happen at above scale. But there is a different issue that's important at above scale. It's hard to get an above scale merit step. The system-wide language is quite demanding for that, right? For the small number of faculty who are above scale. What Berkeley has at above scale, it has half steps and quarter steps at above scale, right? So this is one of the topics that ongoing committees will be looking at. I think the recommendation for Davis will be to have half steps at above scale. Let's just not worry about quarter steps right now, okay? Just have half steps. So I think the proposal will be to carry it into the above scale ranks as well. Okay, so here now are the major feature of the STEP Plus system. First, as I said, merit actions occur on a fixed schedule every 2 years for assistant and associate, every 3 years for full professor, with a few exceptions. The first exception is that promotions could occur off that normative schedule, and that's what Berkeley does too, right? If you're ready for promotion, why not just go for promotion? Okay, it shouldn't be tied to a 2-year schedule, right? So promotions can happen off this normative schedule. A second exception for Davis would be that after a deferral, we propose you can come up the next year. And likewise, after a denial, we propose you can come up the next year. This is not the case at Berkeley. For sure, after a deferral, you wait the normative number of years. I believe that's also true after a denial. Okay? We just thought that waiting, given the system we're on, it would be too harsh a transition to a new system. So we just propose after either a deferral or denial, fine, just come up the next year. Okay, secondly, as I mentioned, all actions can be considered for more than one merit step. So then there should be some language as to, when that should occur. So in this report, which I think it should be available to everyone, if you don't have access to it, just email me, I'll send it to you straight away. We included a brief 2 pages from Berkeley on their language. So for example, their language says a larger than normal 1.5-step advancement requires a strong and balanced record with outstanding achievement in at least one area of review, normally that of research. Their language for 2-step requires exceptionally strong and balanced record in all 3 areas of review with outstanding achievement in research and at least one additional area of review. Now that's the Berkeley language. Our report said, you know, maybe some similar, not necessarily identical, but similar language could be adopted at Davis. So on the 1.5 step here at the bottom of the screen, this again is something that current committees are looking at. I think what's going to come out of that is to say a 1.5-step advancement requires a strong and balanced record with outstanding achievement in at least one area of review, full stop. I don't think we're going to say it has to be research, right? That's just what I hear coming out of the committees. No reason many people feel to single that out, okay? But for a 2-step acceleration, yes, probably one area should be research. So this is just my prediction about what might come out of the ongoing committees. Thirdly, how about a 1/2 step? And I use that to mean a pure 1/2 step, not a 1.5 step, just a pure 1/2 step merit action. That is used at Berkeley, and I'll give you actually a compelling reason in a minute to include this, and it's related to the fact that promotions can occur off schedule. So sometimes, I mean, basically sometimes to get your promotion, you might as well go to a 1/2 step from where you are rather than a whole step. But I'll give you an example of that in a minute. So it's not punitive. But when we presented this to the Representative Assembly of the Academic Senate back in, I think it was January, people were worried that a pure 1/2 step could be used punitively. You know, what if the dean's office just dings you, right, and say, no, this isn't a very good action, it's only worth 1/2 step, okay? So that was not really what we had in mind in writing the report. So then we modified it, so the report that's available says, let's use a 1/2 step, but only if the faculty requests that option be included and it's supported by a department vote. So that would give a fairly narrow focus to the 1/2 step. Naturally, this could be, we think it could be used in some cases where someone is not showing excellent performance in all 3 areas, right? And rather than get a denial or continuous deferrals, why not just take the 1/2 step? Right? But then the faculty member would have to request it, okay? And then there's this quite different issue about promotions off schedule that I'll talk about in a minute. We think there would be a limited scope for this, and it would be a useful, not a punitive action. Barbara.
Let me see if I understand this. So if the faculty member doesn't request a 1/2 step,
Yep.
but goes forward for a regular step or whatever, and whoever decides that it isn't worth a regular step, would they have the option then of giving the 1/2 step, or does that have to be?
They would not have the option of giving the 1/2 step.
So it would be a denial then?
It would be a denial. Then they could come up the next year.
Could they appeal the?
Yeah, now this is tricky. What could you appeal? And our committee didn't deal with that, and that is a significant issue, not only on this, but on anything here. What's the appeals process? And that would have to be looked at, okay? Given that we propose that after denial you come up after 1 year is somehow not as serious as at Berkeley, where we don't think you do come up after 1 year, right? Yeah.
So I have a question.
Please.
It's clear that the faculty member would have to request the 1/2 step. It's not the department faculty that recommends it.
It has to come from the faculty. That's our proposal, right? The faculty has to say, yes, I want that included as one of the items that the department is voting on. And then there could be a department vote. Maybe the department doesn't support it. But we say the faculty themselves has to say, I want that included.
Do you mean this department, does it have to be initiated by the individual, or can the department say, this person's up, we don't think they have a full step, we're going to vote for 1/2 step? That's the question. Does it come from the individual or from the faculty department?
So now we're at the level of how do departments vote. In my department, what would happen then is we wouldn't vote at that meeting, and we'd say, to the chair, why don't you go check with this faculty person as to whether they want a half step included? And then once we know, then we would vote. And that would be no problem in my department. You know, some departments don't want to have this second round of voting. It'd be no problem for mine. So that's how, in my department, how it would be achieved.
You might want to just maybe change the wording a little bit. I think semantically it makes sense. I mean, requests, so it seems to suggest an individual faculty member, but it could be interpreted as the faculty, the department.
Oh, yes, I meant, yeah, if that faculty member, thank you. Yes, that it was an issue with the wording. Thank you, yeah. Thank you for all these questions. Okay, final issue. Because actions would only be reviewed on a fixed schedule, if you get a step and a half at some point in time, you may very well have waited to get that over what you would have gotten in our current acceleration in time. You know, you have a good year, you can't cash in immediately on the STEP Plus system. You have to wait the normative years at STEP. So recognizing that, we propose that there is a temporary off-scale supplement to compensate for the fact that you have waited. And the idea of this is you should not suffer a penalty by waiting in the STEP Plus system when you wouldn't have to wait under the accelerations in time. So sort of to equalize your total financial remuneration under these two systems. Berkeley does not have this temporary off-scale. They're just on half-step, and that's it. They're not comparing to anything, but we would be comparing to something. So this is a tricky part. Let me show you exactly how this would work. So we have a number of examples in the report, right? We could talk about assistant. Here I talk about assistant going to associate. You could talk about associate. You could talk about full. This example I'm giving you now is actually a little complicated, but in a good way for some good reasons. I'm going to illustrate a couple of points. So let's think here about a person who gets hired as assistant step 2. That's year 1 for them. And they spend 2 years at assistant step 2. And then he or she goes to assistant step 3. And under our current system, gets a 1-year acceleration, so they're only 1 year at assistant step 3. Then they go to assistant 4, and then in year 6, they actually achieve tenure. Okay, so they had 5 years as an assistant professor before achieving tenure. With one-year acceleration along the way. So I show here their base salary according to the 9-month schedule. This person might have off scale as well. Just add that on. Doesn't really affect my argument at all. So I'm just showing their base salary. And in the last line, I'm showing their cumulative base salary, just adding it up over the years. So this person would end up with some $452,000 earned over these 7 years. Okay, then we ask the question, what do we think would happen to this person under the STEP Plus proposal, right? How would it work out? And I want to sort of set it up, the experiment, so that they achieve tenure in the same year, right? No reason they wouldn't. Let's set it up that way. And then the question is, what happens along the way? How much are they earning, and so on? So this person, again, comes in at assistant 2, there for 2 years. They had this good year somewhere along the way. So under the old system, accelerations in time, they got this acceleration in time from assistant 3 to assistant 4. Now they can no longer do that. They definitely have to wait 2 years at assistant 3, right? So they don't get that acceleration in time. Then it's pretty reasonable to presume that they will get an acceleration in performance, right? That at their regularly timed merit action here, they'd get a 1.5 step, right? So they'd go to assistant 4.5. And then I want to set it up so that they end up at the exact same place. So in order to do that, this person spends 1 year at assistant 4.5, but then says, hey, I'm ready for promotion, right? That's the same under either system. So they would then take a half step and go from 4.5 to associate 1. Now, that's not the only possibility. This person could have taken a full step and gone from assistant 4.5 to associate 1.5 after just 1 year, but that would be an acceleration in time. That would be permitted. It would be a very rare example of an acceleration in time, even under the STEP Plus system. But what I have in mind here is an individual who got this, this extra bunch of research or teaching or whatever it was done, let's say it's research, early on, right? So I want to have this person have one acceleration, an acceleration in time here in our current system, or this acceleration in performance under the new system. So this half step, it just carries them to associate, which they achieve at the same time. This is one way that Berkeley uses these half steps. You can see it's not punitive, it's just a sort of a natural progression. So they end up at the same place, and the rest of their career trajectory could be the same. But if you look at their cumulative salary at some $452,000, under our current system, it'd be $450,000 under STEP Plus. And why is it lower? Well, really it's lower because you had to wait. Right, under our current system, acceleration in time, you got that, so you had this assistant 4 salary earlier. Here you were waiting, you had an assistant 3 salary there in year 4. Admittedly, then you go up to 4.5, but that is not enough to equalize your total pay, right? So you basically have a penalty due to waiting. So then we propose to compensate for that with a simple rule. So what were you waiting for? You were waiting for this merit step here. So why don't you take the difference between those two salaries, $62,500 and $66,100. Again, if you had off scale on that, it's just constant over time. So adding your off scales wouldn't affect the salary increment, which is $3,600 is that salary increment. Our proposal is to take a quarter of that, which is $900, and give it to this person for the normative years at STEP. So anytime somebody got more than one merit step, doesn't matter if it's 1.5 or 2, you get 1/4 of the salary increment, and that's a temporary off scale for the normative years at STEP. That's the simple rule of thumb, which in our calculations works pretty well. In this case, the person would be getting $1,800, right? And now if you look at their cumulative salary, it'd be $452,300 under the acceleration in time system, $452,150 under the proposed STEP Plus. You can easily write down other cases where rather than getting a little less, they get a little more, or cases where it works perfectly, bang on. So it's a simple rule of thumb that compensates the people for the fact that they're waiting. We don't think this would require a lot of extra staff work because normally this temporary off scale would turn on and turn off at a regular time of review. So here it's turning on at a time of review. It's actually turning off in the middle of this review period, and that's because this was a rather special example where the person got a promotion off of the schedule, right? So there's a few cases where it would turn off outside of the regular review schedule, and staff would just have to be aware of that, okay? But we think this would be doable, quite doable, and we think it's a good way to compensate people. Please?
The temporary offset is determined by how many years they were at Assistant 3?
Yes. It's 1/4 of the difference between Assistant 3 and Assistant 4, and it's for your normative years at STEP, right, which here we're at 2 years, right? If you're a full professor, you get it for 3 years, but it's still 1/4 for 3 years, and that still works pretty well, actually. You know, at full professor, if you got a 1.5 steps and you waited, you might have waited 1 year, or you might have waited 2 years, right? Because otherwise you might have even gotten either a 1-year acceleration or even a 2-year acceleration. So giving this 1/4 step for 3 years kind of compensates for that at the full level. But we have some other examples in the report that sort of go through some examples at the full level. It's always a quarter of the last merit step for normative years at the step you are at. Please.
Just to confirm, this is automatic. This isn't something that
Right.
have to apply for.
Automatic. Staff would do it, and we think this is workable. I mean, I'm giving you the formula, but in fact, the staff would just look it up on a table, right, and be absolutely automatic. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so, question, please.
Yeah, just one more question. I'm, not an economist, so I might be totally thinking of this wrong, but isn't it always better to have your money earlier for things like, compound interest? I mean, aren't we taking a penalty even if it looks like it ends up about the same?
Pretty modest. I mean, it was a difference of $150 anyways. And in examples you look at, that $150 could be, above or below in one system or the other. You could be getting 150 less, you could be getting 150 more. The pure time cost of the money, the interest rate would be less than that. Would be less than that, right? And we could do a calculation. Interest rates are super low these days, right? But we could do a calculation with the interest rate, and it would be less than this small difference that you end up with. And as I said, the difference can go in either direction. Okay, so let me conclude, and then we can open it up for other questions. Currently, by various calculations, some 20 to 30% of personnel actions are accelerations in time, and that keeps us all pretty busy. So the idea of just reviewing on a normative schedule after we've gone to all the work, right, of preparing this personnel action, let's review it on a normative schedule, but let's let ourselves give more than one merit step, right, is a way to save time and still have a form of an acceleration in progress. This temporary off scale I've talked about is intended to compensate for the fact that you would wait, right? If you have a good year, you just cannot cash in on it right away. So, you have to wait, and this temporary off scale is intended to compensate for that. The fact that every action can be considered for more than one merit step, we view as a good thing, right? And again, departments can sort out where that suggestion comes from. Does an individual faculty go to the chair and say, I think I'm worth more than a merit step? Fine. Or does a chair suggest it, or does it come out of faculty voting, right? And it can come out of either. Ultimately, what our report says is when a vote comes forward from the department, it should have a vote on the regular merit. And then if there's any, could stop there, but if there's any interest for anything else more than a merit, it should have a vote on that too, right? Vote on more than merit. And that's pretty much what we do now with accelerations, right? You got to have a vote on the regular merit, you got to have a vote on the acceleration. And somehow departments work out their way of doing that, right? There'd be some flexibilities. Departments can have their own voting rules subject to approval by CAP and by the administration, and that sort of governance wouldn't change here. And then we have the question, so what would the rate of advancement be under the Step Plus system? I mean, this is in a way the key. Okay, we don't want people to advance more slowly, that's for sure, right? I would like them to advance at the same or more quickly. And again, that depends on how faculty vote in the departments, and that's going to depend on the language. What's the language to achieve a 1.5 steps? Is it excellence in all 3 areas and then outstanding performance in 1? I think that will be the language, right? That's a 1.5 steps. And then faculty have to translate that into a vote. So what we don't want to happen is we don't want faculty to think at a 1.5 steps is so hard to get, right? I mean, at the assistant level, a 1.5 steps is something like a 1-year acceleration, right? Sort of translates into that. So it shouldn't be any harder than a 1-year acceleration. At the full level, since we're talking about 3 years, a 1.5 steps is somewhere between a 1-year acceleration and a 2-year acceleration. What we say in the report is we should view a 1.5 steps as no harder than a well-justified 1-year acceleration. That's what I think about it. That's what our committee thought about it, right? We should see, significant number, 25% of these over time, if that's the number of accelerations we have, right? You know, so because we know at the full level, people view a 1-year acceleration as not too difficult, but a 2-year acceleration is significantly more difficult. We don't want the 1.5 steps at the full level to have that extra barrier, really. That's not the goal of this at all. Then there will be some committees who are meeting now. I've already mentioned some issues that need to be sorted out, the issue of above scale, the issue of the language, could also be issues of, you know, how do we do our votes? So that is very much ongoing, and your questions or comments will definitely feed into that process. So let me open it up for other questions. Please.
So my question also is, how is this going to affect retirement if you retire in the midst of an off-scale addition being happened? Will that count towards your baseline retirement salary? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because currently I think off-scale doesn't count towards retirement. I'm not sure about
No,
that.
off-scale does.
It does? Okay. Well, I gotta get one of
Barbara's
those.
confirming
I
that.
got to get one of those. I got to keep moving.
But off-scale does count, and this temporary off-scale would be no different than that off-scale. It would count. It would count.
So if I understand this correctly, what would go forward from the department would be 2 votes. If the department wants to recommend, say, a 1/2 step or a 1.5 step, we would vote on both the 1/2 and just a 1 step that would then be approved by the dean. And so I guess my question is, so it sounds like the dean is basically going to have the judgment call, really, on whether that will be approved. Which
So
sounds
it's
like
Vicky. It's Vicky, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So on this point, I don't mean that to be any different than our current system. I mean, if we put up someone for an acceleration in economics, we report 2 votes. We report the regular merit, and we report the acceleration. We thought that was standard practice. I don't mean to have anything different. And you're only voting on acceleration. Well, I guess sometimes you have a weak vote on acceleration. It is sometimes weaker than the merit, but most of those are strong votes. So I didn't mean to suggest that the dean decides one or the other. I regarded that as kind of the norm, that the dean wants to know what's the vote on acceleration. It might not be 100%, right? And so then you also want to know the merit. Bruno has something to add here.
Maybe I can just add a word. Yes. So the first thing to say is that voting procedures in your department are decided by your department within the boundaries of Bylaw 55 and with the requirement that you submit them to the Senate office. So what Rob described is a perfect example, but it's not the only possibility. And I'm sure there is departments and units where the habit is of submitting just one recommendation with a vote. And if the feeling in the department is that that works well and will also work well within the STEP Plus system, you will certainly not be obligated to change it. But you have to, depending on how you're doing it now, you will, I think, faculty and departments will have to think, do we need to change anything to actually take advantage of the STEP Plus system as it's being proposed? There's another one there.
Please.
You're next.
I think mine might be a related question. Does this shift the decision-making regarding accelerations, we'll use that general word, away from CAP and back towards the faculty?
Yes, in the sense, only in the sense that now the faculty are voting on every action. So I believe every action could be more than a step, not just the ones that are brought earlier. So faculty will have a little greater responsibility in that regard. I don't know if that answers your question, but I view that as a little greater responsibility.
At the moment, as I understand it, an acceleration goes to CAP. Is that not correct?
I'll let Barbara respond here. So go ahead, Barbara.
I don't know if, so Yeah, I don't think this changes that at all, because right now, accelerations that are only one step, right, go to the dean. They don't go to CAP. The other thing is like in our department, if we were to vote for a 1.5, I don't see why we would have to vote for anything lower than that, because if we're voting for a 1.5, why you would have to do it twice?
Okay.
Unless somebody objected. I actually think this is a pretty good way to, so right now I'm back in the department and I'm writing the letters for all the academic personnel. And let me tell you, it takes a lot of work. And I think that this streamlining on, no accelerations in time is a great idea.
Thank you, Barbara.
Yes, I like this idea as well, but I'm curious about how you see the half step being used. So do you see this as being used for, say, some of our faculty who have sort of abandoned the research program but have really excellent teaching and service? And how many times would they be allowed to use this half step increment?
So certainly a person who has weak research but strong teaching and service should be allowed to get a half step. And then your question about how often could this happen is one of the things being looked at on the committees now, right? If you permanently are not doing any teaching, any research, then in principle you could be a lecturer with security of employment, right? But we've had a hard time making that transition, I think, for individuals as a campus, okay? Barbara?
If you don't get advanced.
Oh, here we go.
So historically, we have had some faculty who really do a lot of teaching, but have sort of given up their research or aren't very productive in research. They have not gotten advanced. And so the ability to convince them to move to the lecturer SOE, assuming they have tenure, right, to the lecturer SOE position, is the fact that now they can get advanced. And so if you're not careful here, you'll lose that edge of allowing them to advance, if in fact you don't put the pressure on that they have to switch over.
Fair enough. So you want to be able to give it once or twice or some number of times. You don't want to give it forever. And that exact line, that is definitely one of the things that current committees are looking at, right? I mean, there'd be some determination.
Yeah, discussing this.
The related question is, for someone who gets a 0.5 advancement, half step, would that person be eligible for another half step or full step the following year, or would they have to wait for potentially 3 years at the professor level?
So if you got a half step, the case, that tenure case I showed you was really rare where a half step was used for being just 1 year at a step. That was only for someone going to promotion. Other than that case, a half step, you would have the half step for 2 or 3 years. Okay?
That seems a bit unfair for someone who might have substantial amount of product after that year, within the 3-year period, to have to wait for 3 years for another half a step. Just wondering if there would be an exception for someone who gets only a half step, not 1.5 steps, which was the example where the person went from 3 to 4.5.
Yeah, we are not proposing any exception for that, right? That a half step, our proposal is that except for that promotion case, which was special, right? Where the person got a half step but was only there 1 year. Other than that, if you got a half step, you'll have a half step for your normative years at step. I think the rationale really, the example you gave where you're kind of weak and then you get the half step and all of a sudden you get a lot more in 1 year. Yes, that could certainly happen. I don't think that's the typical case we worry about. The case we worry about is where a person has not been research active and actually needs a little time to get that going again, right? And our current system of these deferral, and then you get a deferral the next year, and then you got a deferral the next year, it's just like too much, too many administrative reviews. Let's give the person a half step, give them a little time, and then they can get back on track. I think that's sort of the idea. Sir. Oh, ma'am, sorry about that.
It's okay. So I have two questions that are not related. One question is whether the faculty member has to request, let's say, a step and a half, or is that something just that the department maybe looks at the case and decides, oh, we think this person is a step and a half? So that's one question. And then the other question is there a plan in place for how to handle the transition to the new system? So for example, if somebody, let's say, went up this year but was denied, and let's say we went, I don't know if we're thinking about going to the Step Plus next year, but let's say we were, when would that person be eligible to go up again?
Right. Okay, so let me deal with the first before I, two very good questions. Okay. What was the first one again?
The first, sorry, the first one was whether the faculty member themselves has to request to be considered for step and a half, for example.
So my own view and the committee's view is it can come from anywhere in the department. Surely the individual himself or herself has to be allowed to make the request to the chair, right? But even if they don't, we would like the faculty to be able to assess it at a meeting, right? So I want it to be as open as possible. I would be uncomfortable if some department said, only the faculty at large can decide, this individual can't say. No, I don't think CAP would support that either. And I'm not saying any department would, but that would just seem very odd to me, right? So I want it to be able to come from anywhere. Now the second question on timing, yes, this is actually a little important. So let me just give you my view. I can see people thinking it's too rushed, we have too much stuff to sort out, let's wait a year. You know, I support it in principle, but let's wait a year. If that happened, I guarantee that in my department, economics, you know, we would see a rush of one-year accelerations. They have nothing to lose. There's no penalty, right? You know, doesn't matter that other people are doing the work, right? You know, some of those would be weak cases and would be turned down, and then you'd have a bunch of disgruntled faculty. Furthermore, you'd have a lot of work in the meantime, and I just wouldn't view that as desirable. Let's contrast that. Suppose we start next year, 2014, 2015. Then what cases would we see in the fall? We would see regularly timed merit actions, and then we could say, do any of these deserve more than one merit step? And I venture to say you'd see plenty of cases that would, right? Once we know the language, if the language is excellence in all three areas and outstanding in one, that's not that hard. And that would be a great start to this system. And then what about a person who had deferred from last year? They're in there. They're in there for sure. Or denied last year. They're in there for sure. And then what about the people who had planned all along to do a one-year acceleration and come up this fall? They had planned it all along. Fine, they have to wait a year. But the fact that they had planned it a year earlier is a perfect reason for them to say, I had planned this a year earlier, I think I should get a step and a half. Faculty can assess it. And then this temporary off-scale kicks in too. So I think if we were, economists actually sometimes like the idea of surprise policy actions, right? You know, and this is a rare case where I think if we did it, we can really focus attention next year on working out this new system, and people who were genuinely delayed because they really would have come up for a one-year acceleration, that is a compelling reason for them to get a step and a half the next year. You know, so I don't feel that they've been hard done by.
Can I just give you a hypothetical?
Yeah,
and maybe you've addressed it, but I just want to make sure. So let's say somebody went up 2 years early and was denied, but was encouraged to go up the next year. But now we're going to be under a new system, and they cannot go up the next year, I assume? They'd have to wait?
Yep.
Is that right?
I would regard that. Then they come up the following year, which is their regular time, and they get a step and a half.
I see. But they would have to wait.
They would have to wait, but then they would be perfect for a step and a half with the temporary off scale to compensate the fact that they waited. And in fact, since then you're looking at, I guess it's a 3-year review period for this person, I mean, then it should be really easy for the department to determine if there's something outstanding in these 3 years, you know.
Thank you.
In the instance of the individual who either is denied or defers and then comes up a year later than their normal cycle,
does that establish a new base for the determination of the 2 or 3 year cycle? It does.
It does. Completely restarts your whole clock, cycle. So not clock, but cycle. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rob, I have a couple of questions here. In the first place, it seems to me that in the book-based disciplines, there's always a strategy of holding back, not necessarily holding back, but not going up for what you might be eligible until the book comes out, which takes years of work and development. And I may be wrong, I didn't notice book-based disciplines being represented on your committee, particularly. It is a constant strategy to go up on a regular cycle, not have an extraordinary amount of stuff to submit, because quite often CAP will say, well, if it's not published, we can't validate it. And they won't even accept the department's judgment that this is brilliant work. They'll say, no, it's actually, we're going to have to wait till it's published. So when it's published, you go up for an acceleration. Quite often that is the case. And I don't see how people in that situation don't suffer with this system. And I think something else needs to be carved out for book-based disciplines. That's one concern I have. A question, can you still accelerate to 6, to Professor 6? That is a barrier step. Is that, you said to associate in full, but does 6 count as that as well?
That's one of the questions that current committees are looking at. Under consideration. Our committee didn't take a stand on it, and at Berkeley the answer is no. They do allow accelerations in time, or you know, you can come up for promotion at any time off cycle. You cannot do that for step 6 at Berkeley, but we need to decide for ourselves.
Well, we've always been able to do that here, and there are people, including myself, who've planned the last 10 years on this financial strategy, and not being able to do it would be changing the rules in a way that I think would be grievously unfair, not just to me, but to lots of other people. And it seems to me that overall, not just with the concerns with the book-based disciplines, but overall, the way you're ripping out accelerations, you're ripping the carpet out from under people on this, and that is what you're doing, and you've given us economic reasons for doing it. If that's what the committee wants to do, you should grandfather in a couple of years and take the hit when all of your colleagues in economics put in for accelerations. I can't help it if they're going to do that to you, but that, it seems to me, there is no way to make this fair without grandfathering something in. And the last thing I'll say is I don't see any way, you guys have done the economics and you're the economist, I'm not. I don't see any way how this doesn't lower salaries over the course of a career. Because what you're doing is, you know, we get our retirement based on the highest 3 years or 5 years, or whatever it is. And I don't see how this doesn't lower that number at the end. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe your quarter step actually does take account of that. But it seems like that's the way we're headed, that people are going to end up making less money, slightly less money in the course of their careers, in the best case scenario.
So let me just see if, and these are some substantive points here, and we'll just see what we can start with here, and then we'll want to deal with some of these points afterwards too. On the step 6, you gave a compelling reason to do advancement of step 6 off the normative schedule. So maybe that can be passed on to the committee.
Well, so, I mean, there's several things, several opinions that people can have, but if you could provide a scenario where you demonstrate that there would be a real disadvantage to, you know, some credible scenario for a person, that would certainly be very valuable for the committee to look at, and it would be certainly taken seriously, and because it's certainly the goal to make it more fair, and if anything, make it easier for people to get accelerated advancement, not more difficult. And I don't think the step 6 is in that respect any different from other steps. Since if you have planned on the accelerated advancement to step 6, There would be the same additional compensation if you do it 1 year later than expected. So it's not clear to me that there is an example there. But I would be very happy to look at any example you care to provide, because we want to make sure there are no such cases where people really suffer financially. That's absolutely not the goal, and we need to fix anything that would result in that.
So on the step 6, please pass that information on. On the issue of retirement, right, and highest 3 years, I mean, I need to work out an example, and sorry, the screen is a little small, but just look at this person. Their per year salary in these last 2 years, say, it's 150 less. So I already said that, but I can construct examples where it's 150 more, or examples where it's bang on. It's not a perfect system, but it is very much what that quarter step is supposed to compensate for, right? And at full level, it'd be a quarter step for 3 years, not for 2, right? This is a kind of a limited example, right? If you look at these annual salaries, again, it's 150 less. I already admitted, okay, here. Oh, actually, no, so here it's 69,500 plus whatever your off scale is. Here it's 69,500 plus 900. So it's actually 900 more. Oh, here it's 66,100. Here it's 67,750 plus 900. Oh, here it is 68. So here it's 66, here it's 68, here it's 69, here it's 70. This person is earning more at the end, not less. More at the end, because you're being compensated because there were some earlier years, this one in particular, where you were earning 66, and here you're only earning 62. That's what you're being compensated for. So you actually earn a little more at the end.
But only if you retire at the end of your cycle, not in what is effectively year 4. I'm not saying anybody can retire after 4 years.
But now we're talking about a 1 year difference.
All I'm saying is,
so
I don't see how you're not gonna actually put a slight break on people's salaries over the course of their career. That's all.
No. You could get more. You could get more. This is not intended to lower salaries. On the contrary, it's intended to equalize it if you progress at the same rate, or if you progress quicker, obviously you get more. But it's intended to equalize. And we could sit down and go through examples on this. So I'm quite confident in this temporary off scale here to compensating for that difference, just on that point. But you had 3 points. The first one you mentioned, the book-based disciplines. There I have to say, so you're saying the normal practice is as soon as the book is published, you immediately go for an acceleration.
Almost usually, yes. That's a normal
process.
That happens all the time. It doesn't happen in every case, but in many.
Right. So then what I would have to try and convince you is that by not being able to go for the acceleration, by waiting 1 year, or I guess it could be 2 if it would have been a 2-year acceleration, but then by getting this temporary supplement, you are at the same place financially. That's what the temporary supplement, right? I mean, also, and then when you come up in the normal merit cycle, then you get a step and a half. I'm taking that for granted too, right? So rather than accelerating, you wait a year or 2, you get a step and a half, or maybe it's 2 steps, but let's say it's a step and a half. And then the whole idea of this temporary supplement is to wash out the difference because you had to wait. And we go through some examples at full, right, where we sort of work this out. And again, sometimes you get a little more, sometimes you get a little less. Often you can get bang on, right? The differences are quite small. That's very much what this is here for. I mean, I'd be happy to sit down with you and go through some examples and play out a worst-case scenario and add it up for you. But that's what I want this to compensate for, absolutely, for the fact that you do have to wait. I don't want any penalty for that.
I guess I'm just a little bit confused. Well, I mean, not confused, but so you're talking about when you go for promotion, whether it's assistant to associate, associate to full, and does that mean that, let's say that I, I was going to go from associate to full, and I had just gotten my merit under the normal Step Plus system this year, and the next year I decided I really wanted to go for promotion.
You got that book published.
I got the book published. Then would that mean that, it's not like also a merit? Because normally if you were going to be promoted from associate to full, wouldn't you get like, it would be like a step up, but then that would be like an early step up, or would you have to stay at the same level and then be at that level for 3 years or whatever?
Quite right.
And I'm not sure that it's very clear how that works.
So in our current system, we have lateral moves. You move from assistant to associate. Barbara will help me out here. Assistant 5 to associate 1, or is it assistant 4 to associate 1? Oh, did I mess up my example here then? Maybe I messed up my example and I didn't have. Yeah, okay. Yes. Correct. Good, good. My example is good. So we do have pure laterals in our current system where you were at assistant 5 and you lateral to associate 1. That's still an option. That's a pure lateral. Okay? So that still would be possible. And you could do that off schedule. What I showed you here was, I actually think, a better case, right? I mean, here you were at 4.5. This is not a lateral. This is a step up in pay, but you're only at 4.5 for 1 year. So I just call this normal progress. And then the third case is you go from 4.5 to associate 1.5. That would be an acceleration. So all three cases are possible. Lateral, which I'm not showing you, I would call this normal progress, or an acceleration would be 4.5 to associate 1.5.
Actually, that doesn't make sense to me. Why wouldn't it be a 4.5 to a 1.5? If you were at if you're at 4 and you normally go to 1,
because you're only there 1 year. If you would have been there 2 years, and then it would be normal to go to associate 1.5.
Okay, so then let's take the case where, again, I decide I want to go up for promotion, which I can do at any time.
Okay.
Then you're saying the only way I can do it if it's not on a regular schedule is if I'm going to do a lateral move. I can't do that promotion then.
No, this is not a lateral.
Well, again, like, why is it only a half step then? That's only a...
Because you're only there 1 year. You could go from, this is normal progress. A lateral would be to go from 5 to associate 1. That's lateral, and that's permitted in the current system. That would be permitted. So there's all three cases are covered.
I guess maybe to me, it just sort of seems like a half step is it's a half step. I mean, you haven't really done that much. Maybe over the course of your career for that, however many years you were there, you could say, okay, I have enough to go up for full professor, but I still think that you're only going up a half step. I mean, I understand your sort of logic, but I'm not sure that I really think that that's fair. I think that if you've been given the opportunity to go up to 4.5 there, then you should be able to go up to associate 1.5.
I'm fine with
that. Because it's a lateral move of one complete step, right? This way, it's only a lateral, or not a lateral move. It's a move of only a half a step up.
Look.
Let me try Barbara. Maybe Barbara, can you? Yeah.
So if you're at step 4, if you're at a assistant 4, you would normally wait 2 years to go to associate 1, right? But if you went to assistant 4 and you got assistant 4.5 and you waited 2 years to go to associate 1, it would be associate 1.5. That would be normal, right? But if you go in 1 year, what this new plan says is it's actually an acceleration because you've only been at the assistant 4, whether it's 4 or 4.5, 1 year. So now to go to associate 1, it's equivalent to a 1-year acceleration. And if you're good enough to do that, then it's possible that your record would, that when the committee looked at it, they would give you associate 1.5. But you also might only get 1. Does that explain it? If you went from assistant 4 to assistant 5, that overlaps totally with associate 1. So if you spent 2 years at assistant 5, your normal promotion then would go to associate 2. Did that help?
Yeah, so I think basically what you're saying is that if you went up there, you had a stellar record, you could still do the associate 1.5 or whatever.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
For the 1 year.
Absolutely.
So it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter. You can, when you go for promotion,
Right.
however many steps you get really is dependent on your record.
Absolutely.
So that clears it up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to go back to this point about retirement because I think I see what was being said and maybe I don't understand, but it does seem as though when a person retires in this cycle affects whether they're better off in the old system or the new system. And it looks to me, let's say, I realize we're looking at assistant professor here, but
Yeah.
let's say that person decided to retire
Yes.
when their salary was 62.5 instead of 66.1. That person would be worse off because of the deferment, right? So it does seem as though there's this sense in which a person has, to sort of get the benefit, they have to wait until the end of their cycle to retire. And maybe they can do that, and maybe they can't.
It is absolutely true. You would not be able to do a 1-year acceleration in time on the year before you retire. That would be impossible in the new system, right? Barbara or others would have to advise me as to how common that is, right? But
I'm sorry, if you're not doing accelerations right the way along, I just don't, there are people who do accelerations right the way along now. And
good.
You're going to have to stop, and that's okay. I get the rationale here.
Okay.
But I don't see how a person like that makes the same under this system as they did under, because what happens, it seems to me that what we make at the end is contingent upon what we make at the beginning and right the way along. It's not like you can just change the system and slow people down and tell them it's not going to have an effect at the end.
Oh, we're not slowing them down because you have the 1.5-step merits. That's the crucial thing. And sorry, I forget your first name.
I guess I'm Louis.
Louis.
I guess it's just that we'll just have to see how that works. It would be I have my doubts that the 1.5 step is going to be given as liberally as the committee seems to think it might because of the way I've seen accelerations work. But that may just be, the proof may have to be in the pudding.
So I'll tell you, at Santa Cruz, they have this sort of partial half step where it's just pure off scale. Okay, so it's not actually, you don't climb the ladder quicker, but it's just off scale salary. They have language pretty much like Berkeley. You have to be excellent in all 3 areas and then outstanding in 1 or 2. We need to study it carefully. About 50% of normal merit actions get 1.5 steps at Santa Cruz. That is brand new. That is just the last couple years, and that's because they were the lowest campus in pay, right? There were some system-wide studies. In fact, the Step Plus proposal, I forgot to say the first committee this came out of, it came out of an off-scale committee that I chaired that was looking at salaries. And, we made some recommendations on off-scale, but we said, in the meantime, why don't we go to a system where everybody could be reviewed for more than a step? I want this to be used more. It is up to the faculty. It is no administrator is going to start holding these back. The administration wants this. I'm just here as a Senate member, not as a member of the administration. Administration wants this. If faculty you get your book published, it should be automatic that you get 1.5 steps, that time. That's outstanding. There's no question about it, right? It should just be automatic, just as accelerations are automatic now, right? Maybe sometimes it's 2 steps if you have a book and a prize. But it all has to do with how the faculty and the departments respond. The language will guide us. But actually, I think it'll be good to have the language written down. It shouldn't be that terribly hard, right? I think it should be automatic when a book is published.
Did you mean to suggest that the retirement salary is based on the temporary supplement or not?
Correct. That is included in the retirement salary. Yes, definitely. Highest 3 years, including off-scale.
So that means that someone who got a recent acceleration, relatively recent acceleration would...
Do better.
Right. Is that your intention?
That's just an outgrowth of this, and that's fine with me. That's fine with me. Because there is one person that does worse. That's the person who would have retired in year 4, hypothetically, forget about assistant here, right? They would have retired in year 4, and they are not, and if they would have gotten a 1-year acceleration in that last year retirement, which I think is pretty rare, that person would be at 62,500 instead of 66, okay? If hypothetically they retire right here. But for someone who plans ahead and tries to get that acceleration a little here, yes, their temporary supplement will boost that. Will boost that. That's just an unintended consequence. I have no problem with that.
Well, it's also possible to not base the retirement salary on the supplement, with the understanding that the supplement does contribute to the cumulative salary.
But we just want this to be regular off-scale, and off-scale definitely is included in your retirement, right? We don't want it to be some special category. It's just regular off-scale. Oh, but it could be. It can go up and down. It can. You're right. Normal off-scale is not temporary, but it can go up and down. We think this, budgeting-wise, staff work-wise, this is, we think, a nice way to do it. Please.
Wanted to commend you and your committees for the work you've done over the years, but also commend the work you've done today to explain to us what's obviously a pretty complex plan, and I'm much more reassured. So now I'm going back to your original supposition, which is that it was brought in to reduce workload. And can you give us any estimate? Have you been able to project what sort of reduced workload it'll do? Do you know how many people are going to be, how much less it'll be?
So by various estimates, about 25% of cases are accelerations. And so, well, then I'd have to do the math to figure out, but that's about the number. So, you know, and we know in our own departments, you know, certainly in economics, we're dealing with a couple of accelerations each year. They require special work, actually, sometimes, because you got sometimes kind of a short record. We always have a meeting on every acceleration, right? We don't necessarily have a meeting on a normal merit action. But I just know that, you know, in our own department, it would make a difference. It differs a lot across departments. So that's about all I can say. So I think it would be, staff like this a lot, this idea, because they can plan ahead too. They don't need to have the dean's office tell them in September or August what cases they're going to be covering and faculty making last minute decisions, except for promotion, right? I guess that can be sort of last minute, but staff like the regularization of idea.
But in this example that you've given, the person is doing an acceleration. They only have 1 year in the green. So how does that reduce anybody's workload?
This was just a promotion. So we make this exception for promotions only. Promotion to, in this case, associate, promotion to full, and I'm persuaded by Louis that we should really seriously consider also the advancements to step 6, too. Only those cases.
Okay. So to me, this plan, I like the idea. I think it will reduce workload. I think we have to take care of any small problems with implementing it to make sure it's fair to everyone. But my second question is going to be about how this is going to be voted upon, because it seems like you're saying you're going to vote on this separately from the second part, which is how we deal with FPC. And to me, that's really critical these be separated, because I think the idea of changing the role of FPC so that it's secondary to the dean's office, that is, it's the second round of review after 1 or 2 eyes see the proposal, is a really big issue. I think that is going to be, from my perspective, I think it's much more fair for your packet for a regular or an accelerated, whichever it is, or now it's both in one, needs to be seen by more eyes and discussed and not decided by fewer people and one decision being made. So is it going to be separate that in June we're just voting on one thing and that other thing is deferred, or is it just 2 separate ballots?
First, let me say I think many people share your opinion, right, that this requires more scrutiny by FPC, not less, right? Many people share that. Bruno will be chairing the meeting in June, so he'll be entertaining the motions. My understanding is that there'll be a vote on Step Plus. That wouldn't rule out some associated discussion of FPCs, but and people might stress, we think we need FPCs more, and that could be a sense of the meeting or whatever. But maybe let Bruno speak to this.
So exactly, we have a lot of people thinking that FPCs are important, and how they function now and how they would best support the new system has to be discussed with the FPC in the college. I don't think there is enough time to do that before the vote in June. It needs more consultation. So I'm very confident that what we will be voting on in June will be just the Step Plus aspect. But of course, if somebody stands up and says, hey, let's do everything, well, we will see what happens.
I'm just concerned, I'm just concerned about the timing of the implementation of the Step Plus. I mean, I'm in the vet school, and our voting system is all computerized, and our IT people have said that they're not going to be able to rewrite the computer programs for the voting prior to June. And I think we're also, as departments, we vote individually, and then those votes are collated, and then that's the departmental vote. And so we're going to have to change departmental procedures to figure out how to propose people for, additional half steps and how to do that voting. And I'm just concerned that it's a very, very short time frame to have all of that in place and supported by the faculty, and that the faculty understand the procedures by June.
So this morning, or well, yesterday actually, I sent a note to Lisa Tell, because Lisa gave a presentation at the vet school, and then she summarized that in the form of some questions to me. So I sent that to her and asked her to send that around to anyone who's interested. But let me comment on this voting, because I know that's very important in the vet school. And I know sort of the structure, that it's all computerized. This was also a concern at the School of Medicine, where we talked on Monday. So Ed Callahan at the School of Medicine had the following proposal for School of Medicine, that on your computerized voting form, where you have all that great information, and you're trying to harvest that for the deans and so on, you basically add a question. Well, probably this question is on there already. Do you support a merit? Right, so that question must be on there, I think. But if so, then you are asked, do you support more than a merit? So that'd be a new question. And if so, you fill in how much more? 1.5 or 2, I guess, are the only options, right? So that'd be 2 extra questions. And so the reason I think that would be crucial for both School of Medicine and School of Veterinary Medicine is it avoids the second round of voting, and that's what I got from Lisa. You don't want to come back and do a second round. That'd be a complete waste of time. But what Lisa had said is that some people at VetMed said that, why doesn't the dean's office just decide? And then I said to her exactly what Bruno said. Voting is up to departments, subject to approval by CAP and the administration. I know CAP would, I'm a former member of CAP. CAP wouldn't be comfortable with the dean's office deciding if they didn't really know how the faculty viewed this. So with just that one extra question, do you support more than a merit? If so, how much? On the voting form, I think that would take care of it. I think that would take care of it. Then the chair, the dean would have the information they need.
So then what if you get a majority that support the merit and a majority that support more than a merit, and then it's split between how much more?
Well, then I think the chair and the dean can sort that out. I mean, to me, that's no different between the dean's office getting a weak vote for an acceleration, and in my department, then there would be the vote for the merit and a weak vote for an acceleration, split vote for an acceleration. It's always been the case that the chair makes a case, dean's office then decides, and other committees. I mean, I think that's not any different than what we'd have now on an acceleration.
Is this on? Yeah, okay. I have a couple of quick questions. Is the equity review process still going to be in place? Because I know that really comes into play late in a person's career. I mean, you have somebody that's a step 8 or something like that, or a step 7, and they're up for a merit increase, and then they see everybody else is going for step 9s and so forth, and they go, my gosh, I have more publications, I've taught more classes, I've done more than any, and they can actually go for an equity review and get themselves changed to a step 9. Is that process going to be done away with? I heard some people say that it was part of the proposal.
We made no proposal to do away with that. So I think it would be the same. I think it would be the same.
So there's no proposal to do away
no
with that?
proposal to do it. No, absolutely not. That would
Okay.
be the same.
I'm a little confused also about the changing role of the dean. The dean is now just supposed to agree with whatever the department vote is, or does the dean vote separately?
No change. No change to that.
There's no change in role?
Maybe let Barbara.
FPC would be gone?
No, it's still there. No change to all that. Maybe let Barbara respond.
So the way it works is that the Senate makes a recommendation. So the FPC or CAP makes a recommendation. It's the administrator that makes the decision. Now, most administrators are not going to say no. Well, let me say that differently. It's very hard to say no if the faculty review committee, the FPC or CAP, has said yes, a lot.
I know one college that would disagree with you that it's very hard for the dean to say no to what the entire rest of the faculty said.
but it's well.
We call it a road.
Regardless of that, it's not any different. I mean, the FPCs make recommendations. They don't make the decision, right? The department makes a recommendation. It's the administrator that has the responsibility for making the decision.
Yeah, and
that won't change with this.
The appeal process will remain in place with CAP. So.
Oh yeah, same appeal process. There will be some extra issues because actually the votes are a bit nuanced. Maybe there can be. Can you appeal that you didn't get a 1.5 when you got a 1? I mean, there might be some decisions we need to make, new decisions we need to make about the appeal process. But any sort of existing appeals would never go away.
Okay. Now, I have also a question about this 1.5 versus full step acceleration. It sounds like you're referring to a merit action of 1.5 as being similar to what we now call a one-step promotion. One-step acceleration, excuse me.
Yes,
One-step
I was
acceleration.
trying to make that analogy. One year acceleration.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
I'm not sure I understand how at the end of their career, how they've made it to the same level they would be otherwise in the current system. It seems to me they'd actually be at a lower level if they had gotten accelerations by only half steps instead of whole steps.
Oh, no, this is the language then. So that I was trying to make an analogy between a 1.5 merit step and a 1 year acceleration. A 1 year acceleration moves you ahead 1 year. A 1.5 step acceleration either moves you ahead 1 year as an assistant or 1.5 years as a full. So I'm just saying a 1.5 step merit is similar to a 1 year acceleration. A 2-step merit would be identical to a skip-a-step acceleration.
I see.
And those are still there, right? No change whatsoever in those.
Okay. I'm going to have to sit and do my own spreadsheet to convince myself of this. Let's see. One other thing I wondered about is, isn't this going to create a rash of people that want to do accelerations right before they're 1 or 2 years before their promotion? Just seems to me if that's the only time you can really do what we now call an acceleration, people are going to, they're going to essentially set themselves up so that they can do an acceleration on their next promotion.
Well, here's a case.
3 chances of that.
Here's a case I would call this normal progress. So we're kind of delinking. I just, maybe if we're saying, look, anybody at 4.5, if, they just get some action, right? And then in their first year, they say, oh, I'm going to go for promotion next year. And, oh, by the way, I want a full step too. So different than this case. So it'd be an acceleration in time. Well, maybe if they have the record to justify it. But, you know, this person I was showing here had this burst of performance early on. And then I'm saying, well, their record justifies promotion in the same year, so they just did this normal progress here, right? In other words, this is not a person who got a book. This person did not get a book published in year 5, right? Because then they ought to go for an acceleration.
But if they had gone from assistant 4.5 for 2 years and then gone for a 2-year wait until their next advancement.
Right.
Then they would go to an associate 1.5?
Correct.
And that would be at a higher salary. So I'm not sure if you...
That's a normal merit.
If you had this strung out where you had 2 years at 4.5, and then your last box was 1.5 associate,
that'd be an interesting case to look at.
I'm not so convinced that at the end of the 7th year, if you include the so-called supplement, that your numbers would come out even similar. It actually, the person would have been better not doing an acceleration other than the fact that they got tenure a year early.
We could do that case. We could do that case together. But I wanted to set up this example. What I was trying to show is if you end up at the same place, you have not suffered a financial loss along the way. Yeah. We could have a look. That would be an interesting case. Right, but you'd want to string that out a little further too. But, you know, we could work out that case.
So we are running late. We'll take one more question, but invite everyone to submit questions that you're still sitting with or that come up later. Or if there is a scenario that you think we need to look at because there is a problem with it, send it to the Senate office, would be the best place to send it. And we'll work it out and see whether we have to make a modification. So there is another forum, just in case you haven't had enough. On Thursday, I believe it's at 10 o'clock in the conference center.
But it's the same presentation.
It's the same presentation. And I guarantee you many of the same questions asked by other people, but you can, you're of course welcome to attend if you want. So Mitch, you have the last question.
So I've got a suggestion. This has to do with retirement again. But for normal pay, everything happens like this. But a special thing happens, not in terms of what you're paid, but in terms of calculating your retirement salary. And what I would suggest, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, is that those two, say you pretend this is retirement and you retired after the end of year 4. Just pretend you served all your time and this is not assistant professor and that's just the way it happened to work. It happens to be 2 years.
Sure.
Okay, so now I think if you retired after year 4, you'd be at a disadvantage in the new system. I think you would.
Yep.
So what I would suggest is simply take the $900, you still paid the same way, but when you calculate your retirement, shift it back 1 year for what your pay hypothetically was, so that now you're rewarded for that year 4, where you should have been probably at a higher level. So in other words, $900 for retirement calculation purposes only, move back for year 4 and 5. Not in terms of when you're paid your salary, but in terms of when you're calculating how much you're entitled to when you're retired.
So then you're saying that in your very last year, you want to have a personnel action in the fall of your last year. And if your colleagues say...
Well, you're scheduled for one. Not you want one. You were scheduled for one anyway. But it won't be effective, but you would have gone it if you could have accelerated. If you could have accelerated, you would have gone in it, but you didn't. So you've actually been performing at a higher level and not compensated for it. And all you're asking is that in retirement, that you be accounted for that level you weren't paid for in the first place, but at least in retirement count it.
It's very clever, but probably too clever.
Okay, thank you everybody for these excellent questions, and I hope we can follow up.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.